The coffee in my mug has been cold for 3 hours, but I haven't moved to pour it out. I'm just staring at the kitchen clock, watching the second hand sweep away another minute of a life I don't recognize anymore. My name is Miles, and 6 months ago, I was a man who thought he had everything. I had the corner office, the respect of my peers, and a wife who looked at me like I was the center of her universe. Today, I'm just the guy who forgets to take the trash out. I'm the unemployed burden, sitting in the dark because I'm afraid that turning on the lights will make the reality of this empty house too bright to ignore. Have you ever felt like you've become a ghost in your own home? Like you're screaming at the top of your lungs, but the person sitting 3 feet away from you doesn't even blink? That's where I am. And if you're watching this right now, maybe from your car or while you're trying to find the strength to get out of bed, I want you to know I see you. Tell me in the comments where you're joining me from tonight. Sometimes just knowing someone else is awake in the middle of their own storm makes the air feel a little less heavy. And if you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that subscribe button. You aren't alone. And this story, well, it's for all of us who were counted out too soon. The silence in this house is different now. It used to be peaceful. The kind of silence that comes after a long, productive day. Now it's heavy. It's the kind of silence that smells like unspoken resentment and expensive perfume that I didn't buy. Tessa used to be my biggest cheerleader. When I lost my position at the firm during the merger, she told me we'd be fine. She told me we were a team. But team is a word people use when the sun is shining. When the clouds rolled in, she didn't grab an umbrella for us. She just started looking for a drier place to stand. Lately, she's been working late 4 nights a week. She's an account manager at a mid-sized tech firm, a job she got through a connection I made for her years ago. She comes home at 11 p.m. smelling like cedarwood and high-end scotch, the kind of scents that don't come from a fluorescent-lit office cubicle. She doesn't look at me when she walks in. She looks through me. I'm just a piece of furniture that breathes. Yesterday, I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. She didn't even take off her coat before she started. "Miles, the sink is still leaking," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "I spent 10 hours dealing with clients today, and I come home to a house that's falling apart because you can't be bothered to call a plumber." "I can fix the sink, Tessa," I said quietly. I was looking at some market data today. I think I found a lead." She let out a short, jagged laugh that cut deeper than any insult. "A lead? Miles, look at yourself. You're wearing the same hoodie you wore 3 days ago. You aren't looking at data. You're playing pretend while I'm out here carrying the weight of this entire marriage. I didn't sign up to be the sole provider for a roommate who's given up on life." She didn't wait for an answer. She just walked past me, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream that I haven't given up. I wanted to tell her about the encrypted laptop hidden in my gym bag. I wanted to tell her that while she's at her office, I've been orchestrating moves that would make her bosses tremble. I've been managing the Phoenix Fund, a private equity powerhouse I started with my severance and a few silent partners who still believe in my dead career. I'm not unemployed. I'm the most powerful man she doesn't know. But I stayed silent. There's a specific kind of pain in letting the person you love believe the worst about you just to see if they'll still stay. It's a test I'm failing every single day. Every morning, I go through the ritual. I put on a button-down shirt, grab my bag, and tell her I'm headed to networking meetings. In reality, I go to the public library downtown. I sit in the back corner, near the dusty archives where the Wi-Fi is steady and the distractions are few. I spend 8 hours a day in a digital war room. I'm currently finalizing the leveraged buyout of Titan Corp. It's a massive play, a shark move that's going to swallow the very company where Tessa works. The irony isn't lost on me. While she's complaining about our mortgage and my lack of ambition, I'm preparing to buy the building she stands in. But at night, when I'm back in this kitchen, none of that money feels real. The only thing that feels real is the way she flinches if my hand brushes hers while passing the salt. This morning was the worst. I was folding laundry, the husbandly duties I do to keep the peace, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the shower. I shouldn't have looked. I've never been that guy. But the name on the screen made my blood turn to ice. Barrett. Barrett was my junior associate 5 years ago. I taught him how to read a balance sheet. I gave him his first big break. Now he's the CEO of Titan Corp. He's the man everyone calls a visionary, mostly because he's good at taking credit for other people's ideas. The message read, "The hotel bar was a mistake. We should have just gone straight to my place. Can't wait for late night filing again tonight. Tell the ghost I said hi." The ghost. That's what they call me. I stood there, holding a warm towel, feeling like the world had shifted 10 degrees off its axis. My heart wasn't racing. It was slowing down, turning into something heavy and cold, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I just placed it back exactly where it was, aligned perfectly with the edge of the marble counter. When Tessa came out, wrapping a robe around herself, she looked at me and frowned. "Why are you standing there like an idiot, Miles? Did you finish the lights? The dryer is making a noise." I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for a trace of the woman I'd proposed to on a rainy pier in Maine. She was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw me as a relic of a past she was desperate to bury. "I finished the laundry, Tessa," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from a long way off. "Everything is handled." She rolled her eyes and grabbed her phone, her thumb immediately sliding across the screen. I watched her face soften as she read the message. A small, genuine smile played on her lips, the kind of smile she hasn't given me in over a year. She tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear and started typing back, her fingers moving with a frantic, excited energy. "I have to go in early today," she said, not looking up. "Huge merger talks. Barrett needs me on the floor for the preparation. Don't wait up for dinner. There's some leftover Thai in the fridge." "Barrett," I repeated the name, testing the weight of it. "He's doing well then?" Tessa finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a pity that burned worse than her anger. "He's doing incredible, Miles. He's what a man in this industry looks like. He takes risks. He commands a room. Maybe if you spent more time studying people like him and less time analyzing data at the library, we wouldn't be in this position." She grabbed her designer bag, the one I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary when I was at the top of the world, and headed for the door. I followed her to the hallway, watching as she stepped into her heels. She looked polished, professional, and entirely unreachable. "Tessa," I called out just as she reached for the handle. She paused, looking impatient. "What, Miles? I'm late." "Just be careful," I said. "The market is volatile. Things can change in a heartbeat." She gave a dismissive grunt, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty hallway. I stood there for a moment, the silence of the house rushing back in to fill the space she'd left. Then I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my gym bag. I didn't go to the library today. I drove to a private office park on the outskirts of the city, a place where the glass was tinted and the security required a biometric scan. I walked into a suite that had no name on the door. Inside, Gabe was waiting for me. He was surrounded by 6 monitors, all flickering with red and green candles, the heartbeat of the financial world. He looked up, his expression grim. "They're moving faster than we thought, Miles," Gabe said, tapping a pen against his desk. "Barrett is trying to dilute the shares to block a hostile takeover. He knows someone is sniffing around, but he doesn't know it's us. If we're going to pull the trigger on Titan, it has to be now." I sat down in the leather chair, the familiar scent of expensive stationery and cold air conditioning grounding me. I opened my laptop, the interface of the Phoenix Fund glowing in the dim light. I looked at the spreadsheets, the debt structures, and the personal files we'd gathered on Barrett's extracurricular spending of company funds. "He think he's a lion," I whispered, my fingers hovering over the keys. "He's a house of cards, Miles," Gabe countered. "One gust of wind and the whole thing collapses. But you have to decide. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be the most hated man in his circle and the most powerful man in the city. Are you ready for the fallout?" I thought about the cold coffee. I thought about the ghost comment. I thought about the scent of cedarwood on my wife's coat. "Start the accumulation," I said, my voice steady. "I want 51% by the end of the week. I want him to feel like he's winning right up until the floor disappears." I spent the next 14 hours buried in the mechanics of the kill. By the time I left the office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the pavement. I drove home, my mind a blur of numbers and strategies. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a car I didn't recognize idling at the curb. It was a black, late-model European sedan, sleek, aggressive, and expensive. As I parked, the passenger door opened and Tessa stepped out. She didn't see me at first. She was leaning back into the car, laughing at something the driver said. Then the driver leaned forward. It was Barrett. He caught my eye through the windshield. He didn't look away. Instead, he reached out and tucked a lock of Tessa's hair behind her ear, a slow, deliberate movement designed to be seen. He gave me a sharp, mocking nod, the look a predator gives a scavenger, before pulling away, the tires chirping against the asphalt. Tessa turned and saw me standing by my old SUV. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by that familiar mask of cold indifference. She walked toward the house, her keys jingling in her hand. "You're home late," she said, her voice dripping with boredom. "Find any leads today?" I didn't answer. I followed her inside, the air in the house feeling thinner than usual. She went straight to the bedroom to change, tossing her blazer onto the sofa as she passed. I stayed in the living room, my eyes landing on her blazer. A small white envelope was sticking out of the pocket. I shouldn't have reached for it, but the ghost was tired of being hauntings. I pulled the envelope out. It wasn't a letter. It was an invitation to the Titan Corp annual gala and shareholders meeting, the event where Barrett planned to announce his new era for the company. On the back of the card, in Barrett's bold, arrogant handwriting, were the words, "Wear the blue dress. I want everyone to see what I've taken from him." I felt a surge of something hot and sharp rise in my chest, breaking through the months of numbness. It wasn't just anger. It was a cold, crystalline clarity. I gripped the card so hard the edges dug into my palm. The physical pain, a welcome distraction from the betrayal. Tessa walked back into the room, wearing a silk slip dress, her eyes scanning the table for her wine glass. She saw the invitation in my hand and stopped, her expression shifting from surprise to a defiant sneer. "Put that down, Miles," she said, reaching for the card. "It has nothing to do with you." I didn't hand it over. I held it just out of her reach, my eyes locked on hers. For the first time in months, I didn't look away. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink. I stood my ground in the center of the room, the invitation trembling slightly in my grip as the realization of what I had to do finally settled into my bones. She reached out to snatch it, her fingernails grazing my wrist, but I stepped back, my eyes fixed on the bold logo of the company I was about to destroy. I slowly folded the card and tucked it into my own pocket, my heart hammering a slow, rhythmic beat against my ribs as I turned toward the window, watching the last of the light fade from the horizon. The darkness outside the window finally swallowed the streetlights, leaving nothing but my own reflection staring back at me from the glass. I could feel the sharp edge of that invitation pressing against my thigh through my pocket, a constant physical reminder that the man I used to be was officially dead. Tessa was still standing there, her chest rising and falling with jagged breaths of indignation, waiting for me to crumble or apologize like I always did. But the apology died in my throat. I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt like a storm that had finally gathered enough pressure to break. I walked past her without saying a word, the floorboards creaking under a weight that wasn't just physical. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at the man in the mirror. My eyes looked different, sharper, colder. The pity she'd thrown at me all those months had acted like a whetstone. And now, I was finally dangerous. I thought about that blue dress Barrett mentioned. I thought about the way he'd touched her hair in that car, a casual display of ownership that made my skin crawl. He wasn't just stealing my wife. He was trying to erase my dignity as a trophy for his own shelf. "You're acting weird, Miles," Tessa called out from the bedroom, her voice laced with a nervous edge she tried to hide behind a sneer. "If you're going to have a breakdown, do it somewhere else. I have a big week. I can't deal with your drama." I patted my face dry and walked to the doorway. "I'm not having a breakdown, Tessa," I said, my voice so level it surprised even me. "I'm having a moment of clarity. You should enjoy your week. Truly. It's going to be one for the history books." She didn't know how to respond to that. She just huffed and climbed into bed, turning her back to me and pulling the duvet up like a shield. I lay down on my side of the bed, the vast chasm between us feeling more like a canyon tonight. I didn't sleep. I spent the hours counting the rhythm of her breathing, thinking about the thousands of small betrayals I'd ignored over the last year. The late meetings that always required fresh lipstick. The way she'd started hiding her screen whenever a notification popped up. The way she talked about Barrett with a reverence she used to reserve for our dreams. By 5 a.m., I was gone. I didn't leave a note. I drove back to the tinted glass sanctuary where Gabe was already waiting, his eyes bloodshot from a night of monitoring international trades. The air in the office was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of high-powered servers. "We've secured 34%, Gabe said, his voice raspy. "But Barrett's board is getting twitchy. They've authorized a poison pill strategy to devalue the stock if anyone hits 40. We have to move with surgical precision now, Miles. If we trip the wire too early, the company will implode before we can own it. Then we don't trip the wire, I replied, leaning over the heat maps of Titan Corp's ownership structure. We don't just buy the shares, we buy the people holding them. Who are the swing voters on the board? Gabe pulled up 3 profiles, old school investors. They hate Barrett's flashiness, but they love the returns he's been promising. If we show them that his returns are built on creative accounting and a massive personal debt bubble, they'll flip. I spent the next 3 days living in a world of shadows and spreadsheets. I wasn't Miles, the unemployed husband, anymore. I was a predator in a bespoke suit, moving through the financial undergrowth with a knife between my teeth. I met with board members in dim back rooms of steakhouses they thought were private. I showed them the truth about Barrett, how he'd been using company assets to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford, including that European sedan and the penthouse he'd been using for his trysts. Every night I'd return to the house and play the part. I'd wear the old hoodie. I'd let Tessa complain about the grocery bill. I'd watch her get ready for her dates with Barrett, her excitement radiating off her like a cheap perfume. It was a masochistic exercise in self-control. I'd sit on the sofa, watching some mindless show, while she stood in front of the hallway mirror, checking her reflection from every angle. Barrett says the gala is going to be the turning point for the whole industry, she said Thursday night, stepping into a pair of heels that cost more than my first car. He's being heralded as the savior of the firm. It must be hard for you, Miles, watching someone your age actually achieve something while you're stuck in neutral. I looked up from the TV, my expression carefully blank. Success is a fragile thing, Tessa. One day you're a savior, the next you're a cautionary tale. She laughed, a bright, brittle sound. Spoken like a man who settled for being a cautionary tale. I'll be home late. Don't wait up. As soon as the door clicked shut, I pulled out my phone. Gabe, move on the remaining block. I want the final signatures by midnight. And get me the guest list for the gala. I need to make sure my invitation is still valid. The day of the gala arrived like a looming thunderstorm. The air was heavy with anticipation. I watched Tessa leave the house in that blue dress, the one Barrett had requested. It was backless, shimmering like deep water, and she looked undeniably beautiful. But when she looked at me to say goodbye, all I saw was the betrayal she wore as comfortably as the silk. "You're not going out today?" she asked, noticing I was still in my bathrobe at noon. "I have some things to finish up here," I said. "A few loose ends." "Whatever," she sighed. "Wish me luck. Tonight changes everything." "I know it does," I whispered as she walked away. The house was finally silent. I went to the guest bedroom closet and pulled out a garment bag I'd hidden behind the winter coats. Inside was a charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that matched the cold gray of my eyes. I took my time getting ready. I shaved with a straight razor, the blade sliding over my skin with a terrifying ease. I polished my shoes until they looked like black glass. I looked at the invitation one last time before tucking it into my breast pocket. I wasn't just going to a party. I was going to a funeral, the funeral of Barrett's career and the death of the man I used to be. I arrived at the venue 30 minutes after the doors opened. The grand ballroom was a sea of black ties, diamonds, and forced smiles. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, looking down at the crowd. I spotted them almost immediately. Barrett was in the center of a circle of admirers, his arm draped possessively around Tessa's waist. He was holding a glass of champagne, his head thrown back in a boisterous laugh. He looked invincible. Tessa was glowing, leaning into him, her eyes scanning the room as if she were the queen of the ball. She looked like she'd finally found the life she'd always wanted. She looked happy. And for a split second, a pang of the old Miles, the man who loved her, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered the message on her phone. "Tell the ghost I said hi." I began to descend the grand staircase, my footsteps silent on the plush red carpet. I didn't head for the bar or the buffet. I walked straight toward the VIP lounge, where the board members were sequestered for a private pre-announcement toast. The security guard at the door moved to block my path, his hand resting on his radio. "Invite only, sir," he said firmly. I didn't reach for the paper invitation. I simply leaned in and said 3 words that I knew Gabe had seeded into the security protocol hours ago. The guard's eyes widened, his posture shifting from aggressive to deferential in a heartbeat. He stepped aside and opened the door, bowing his head slightly as I passed through. The room inside was quiet, the air smelling of expensive tobacco and aged leather. The 6 board members were there, including the 3 I'd flipped. They looked up as I entered, their expressions a mix of apprehension and respect. Gabe was standing in the corner, holding a leather-bound folder. He nodded at me, a silent signal that the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the low murmur of the room, "I believe we have a company to discuss." One of the older board members, a man named Henderson who had known me for years, stood up and walked over. He looked me up and down, a faint smile on his weathered face. "Miles, you look a lot better than the rumors suggested. We've reviewed the final disclosures you sent over. The creative use of the pension fund was the final straw. Barrett has no idea, does he? He's currently celebrating his coronation downstairs," I replied, checking my watch. I'd hate to keep him waiting for the news. "The documents are signed, Miles," Henderson said, handing me the folder. "As of 10 minutes ago, Nexus Holdings owns 52% of Titan Corp. You are the majority shareholder. The board is at your disposal." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. No adrenaline, no shaky hands, just a cold, hard sense of purpose. I took the folder and tucked it under my arm. "Wait for my signal," I told them. "I want to hear his speech first. I want to hear exactly what he thinks the future looks like before I take it away from him." I stepped out of the lounge and back onto the mezzanine, looking down at the stage where a microphone was being set up. Barrett was moving toward the podium now, tapping the mic to get everyone's attention. The room began to quiet down, the guests turning their eyes toward their visionary leader. Tessa was standing in the front row, looking up at him with a pride that made my stomach turn. I moved to the railing, my hands gripping the cold marble. I watched as Barrett straightened his tie, flashed a $1 million smile, and began to speak. He talked about disruption, about leaving the weak behind, and about a new era of dominance. Every word he spoke was a nail in his own coffin. As he reached the crescendo of his speech, he looked directly at Tessa and winked. And none of this would be possible without the support of those who truly understand what it takes to win, he proclaimed, his voice booming through the speakers. I felt the folder in my hand, the weight of it a solid, grounding presence. I didn't wait for him to finish. I started walking down the stairs again, this time with a purpose that drew eyes from the crowd. People started to whisper, noticing the man in the gray suit who was moving through the sea of guests like a shark in shallow water. Tessa turned her head as I approached the front row. Her eyes widened, her mouth dropping open in a silent gasp. She looked at my suit, then at my face, then back at the stage. The confusion on her face was almost poetic. She took a step back, her hand going to her throat as I came to a halt just a few feet away from her. Barrett noticed the shift in the crowd's attention. He stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowing as he looked down from the podium. He squinted through the stage lights, trying to place my face. Then, the recognition hit him. A smirk began to spread across his lips, a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Well, look who it is," Barrett said into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "It seems the ghost has decided to haunt our celebration. Did you get lost looking for the library, Miles? Or are you here to apply for that delivery job I mentioned?" A few people in his inner circle chuckled. Tessa looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. She looked at me with a mixture of embarrassment and rage, her face flushing a deep crimson. "Miles, get out of here," she hissed, her voice low and frantic. "You're embarrassing yourself. You don't belong in a room like this." I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at her. My eyes were locked on Barrett, who was leaning over the podium, enjoying his moment of public humiliation at my expense. I slowly reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a small, sleek remote, the one Gabe had given me to control the ballroom's AV system. With a single, deliberate click, the massive screens behind Barrett flickered and changed. Gone were the sleek corporate logos and the new era graphics. In their place were the internal audit reports, the bank statements showing the drained pension funds, and a series of high-resolution photos of Barrett's private dealings that had nothing to do with business. The laughter in the room died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the ballroom, broken only by the sound of Barrett's glass hitting the stage floor and shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. He turned around, his face draining of all color, as he stared at the evidence of his own destruction plastered on the walls for everyone to see. I stepped forward, moving into the pool of light at the foot of the stage, and looked up at the man who thought he'd taken everything from me. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting the silence scream for me, while the folder in my hand caught the glint of the chandeliers. The sharp, crystalline sound of glass fracturing against the stage floor acted like a starter pistol for the chaos that followed. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom, a wave of shock that replaced the artificial corporate cheer. Barrett stood frozen, the shadow of his own greed looming over him on the massive screens. His mouth hung open, his face a sickly shade of gray that matched the stone pillars lining the room. He looked less like a visionary leader and more like a cornered animal realizing the trap had been set months ago. I watched him from the foot of the stage, my hands steady, my breathing deep and rhythmic. The weight of the world hadn't shifted onto my shoulders. It had finally fallen off. Behind me, the room was a hive of frantic whispers. People who had been laughing at Barrett's jokes seconds ago were now pulling out their phones, capturing the downfall of a Titan in real time. I could feel the heat of the stage lights on my skin, but inside, I was absolute zero. Tessa was a statue beside me. Her hand was still frozen at her throat, her eyes darting between the incriminating bank statements on the screen and my face. The realization was hitting her in agonizing waves. She wasn't just losing a boyfriend, she was losing the future she'd traded her soul for. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the sleeve of my charcoal suit. A touch that felt like a desperate anchor. "Miles." "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the silence. "What did you do?" I didn't turn to look at her. "I didn't do anything, Tessa," I said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "I just stopped holding the door shut. This is who he's always been. You were just too busy looking at his watch to notice the blood on his hands." Up on the stage, Barrett finally found his voice, though it was thin and desperate. "This is a glitch! Someone hacked the server!" he shouted, gesturing wildly at the tech crew in the back. "Miles, you pathetic loser. I'll have you arrested for this. Security! Get this man out of here." But the security team didn't move toward me. They stood at the perimeter of the room, their eyes fixed on Gabe, who gave a slight, imperceptible nod. The board members I'd met in the lounge began to file out of the shadows, taking their places on the stage behind Barrett. They didn't stand with him, they stood against him, a wall of institutional power that had finally decided to purge the infection. "The only person leaving tonight, Barrett, is you," Henderson said, stepping forward into the light. His voice carried the authority of decades in the industry. "The board has seen enough. We've been presented with evidence of gross negligence, embezzlement, and a complete breach of fiduciary duty. As of this moment, you are relieved of all duties at Titan Corp." "You can't do that. I'm the face of this company. You need me." "We don't," Henderson replied coldly, "because Titan Corp doesn't belong to the shareholders anymore. It's been acquired." The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the cooling fans in the projectors. Barrett looked like he'd been struck. "Acquired? By who? Who has that kind of capital?" I felt the folder in my hand, the physical manifestation of every hour I spent in that dusty library, every night I sat in the dark while my wife slept in another man's shadow. I took the 3 steps up the stage, my shoes clicking with a finality that echoed through the speakers. I stood at the podium, nudging the microphone toward me. "Nexus Holdings," I said, my voice resonating through the ballroom with a clarity that made Barrett flinch. "I am the sole managing partner, and as the majority owner of this firm, my first act of business is to ensure you never work in this city again." The sound that came out of Barrett wasn't a words, it was a strangled sob of disbelief. He looked at me, then at the board, then down at Tessa. He was looking for an ally, a hand to hold, but he found nothing but a vacuum. Tessa had backed away from the stage, her face pale, her eyes fixed on me as if she were seeing a ghost that had suddenly developed the power to kill. I didn't feel the surge of joy I expected. I felt a profound sense of justice, a settling of accounts that had been overdue for a lifetime. I looked out at the sea of faces, the elite, the powerful, the people who had ignored me at every gala for a decade, and I saw them seeing me for the first time. Not as the +1, not as the unemployed husband, but as the architect of their new reality. Gabe walked up the steps and handed me a single sheet of paper. It was the termination notice, pre-signed by the board. I didn't hand it to Barrett. I let it flutter onto the shattered glass at his feet. "You told me once that the market leaves the weak behind," I said, leaning in so only he could hear. "You were right. You just didn't realize you were the one falling behind." Barrett tried to lung at me, a desperate, clumsy move, but the security guards I'd hired were on him in a second. They didn't use force. They simply blocked his path with the efficiency of professional walls. They escorted him toward the side exit, his protests fading as the heavy velvet curtains swallowed him whole. The ballroom was in a state of suspended animation. The king was dead, and the new one was standing at the podium in a suit that cost more than Barrett's car. I looked down at Tessa. She was standing in the center of the aisle, the blue dress shimmering under the harsh glare of the New Era screens. She looked small. For the first time in our marriage, she looked completely and utterly lost. She tried to move toward the stage again, her lips forming my name, a plea for some kind of recognition or mercy. I watched her struggle to maintain her composure, the social climber realizing she just climbed onto a sinking ship while the man she discarded was the one owning the ocean. I turned back to the microphone, my gaze sweeping the room. "The bar is still open," I announced, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "But the management has changed. Tomorrow, we begin the work of rebuilding what was broken. Tonight, we just remember that some things can't be bought." I walked off the stage, not toward the VIP lounge or the waiting reporters, but toward the grand entrance. I needed air. I needed to feel the cold New York wind on my face. As I pushed through the heavy brass doors, the city light stretched out before me, a grid of endless possibilities. I was halfway to my car when I heard the frantic click of heels on the pavement behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The scent of her perfume reached me first, the same scent that had haunted my kitchen for months. "Miles, wait, please." Tessa's voice was breathless, stripped of its usual arrogance. I stopped beside the black sedan Gabe had waiting for me. I didn't turn around immediately. I looked at my hands, noticing for the first time that they were perfectly still. No tremors, no hesitation. "Miles, I didn't know," she said, catching up to me, her hand reaching for my shoulder before she thought better of it and pulled back. I was confused. "Barrett, he lied to me. He told me you were giving up. He made me think I was helping us by staying close to him." I finally turned to face her. The streetlights caught the tears in her eyes, making them glint like the diamonds she was wearing. In any other world, I would have reached out to wipe them away. In this one, I just felt a cold, distant curiosity. "Helping us?" I asked, my voice flat. "Is that what the messages were about? The hotel rooms? The mocking jokes about the ghost in your house?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. But we can fix this, Miles. We're a team, remember? Imagine what we could do now, with your success and my connections. We could be the most powerful couple in the city." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized that she still didn't get it. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry that she'd picked the wrong side. She was looking at the Phoenix Fund, not the man who had built it from the ashes of his heart. "You're right about one thing, Tessa," I said, opening the car door. "Tonight did change everything." "Then let's go home," she said, a spark of hope lighting up her face. "Let's go home and talk about the future." I paused, my hand on the leather interior of the door, and looked back at the grand hall where the music had started playing again. A hollow, celebratory sound for a world that had already moved on. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a profound, empty space where my love for her used to live. I took a deep breath of the freezing night air, the engine of the car purring like a predator in the dark. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the house keys, the ones that had felt like lead for 6 months. I didn't say a word as I held them out in the palm of my hand, the metal cold against my skin, as the first few flakes of a late-season snow began to drift down between us. The metal felt like an icy splinter against my skin, a jagged piece of a past I was no longer willing to carry. Tessa stared at the keys in my open palm, her breath hitching, the white vapor of her exhale swirling into the falling snow. For years, these keys represented a sanctuary, a place where we'd built a life on promises that turned out to be as thin as the paper they were written on. Now, they were just objects, meaningless, cold, and heavy. I didn't drop them. I didn't throw them. I simply held them there, waiting for her to realize that the door they opened no longer led to me. "Miles, please, don't do this," she pleaded, her voice trembling as much as her hands. The shimmering blue dress, once a symbol of her triumph, now looked like a costume from a play that had been canceled mid-act. "We've been through too much. You can't just walk away because of one lapse in judgment. I'm your wife. You were my wife when I was sitting at that kitchen table in the dark," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the city. "You were my wife when you were laughing in Barrett's car while I was folding your laundry. Being a wife isn't a title you reclaim when the bank account looks better. It's a choice you make when it looks empty." She reached for the keys, her fingers brushing mine, but there was no spark, no warmth, just the sensation of a stranger touching my hand. As her fingers closed around the metal, I let go. The weight transferred to her, and I watched her shoulders slump as if I'd handed her a pile of bricks. She looked at the keys, then back at me, her eyes searching for a crack in my armor, a sign of the soft, forgiving Miles she'd exploited for so long. She found nothing but the reflection of the streetlights in my eyes. I stepped back, the snow crunching under my polished shoes, and sat in the back of the sedan. Gabe was behind the wheel, his silhouette a dark, silent shadow of loyalty. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't have to. He knew that the man who had entered that ballroom was different from the man now sitting in this car. "Where to, Miles?" Gabe asked softly, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "To the future, Gabe," I replied. "Drive." As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the gala or the woman standing alone on the sidewalk. I watched the city blur into a streak of neon and gray. People often ask me in the comments of my posts how I survived the betrayal. They ask how I found the strength to build an empire while my heart was being dismantled. The truth is, I didn't find strength. I found perspective. I realized that the people who treat you like an option while they are your priority are teaching you exactly where they belong in your life. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of cold, hard efficiency. I stayed in a hotel suite overlooking the park, a place where the air felt clean and the silence was my own. I didn't check my personal phone. I didn't need to hear the frantic voicemails or read the desperate texts. My work phone, however, was a different story. It was alive with the sounds of the board members, the lawyers, and the investors all wanting a piece of the new Titan Corp. Barrett was gone, not just from the company, but from the industry. The evidence I displayed on those screens had triggered a forensic audit that revealed a level of fraud that would keep him in courtrooms for the next decade. He'd gone from a visionary to a pariah in the span of a single champagne toast. On the third day, I met with my legal team. We sat in a glass-walled conference room that seemed to float above the clouds. The divorce papers were ready. I signed them with a steady hand, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. There was no bitterness in the stroke of the pen, only a profound sense of closure. I left her the house. I left her enough to live comfortably, but not enough to buy her way back into the world she'd tried to steal. I wanted her to have the house, so every time she walked into that kitchen, she'd remember the man who used to sit there and the ghost she'd created. She called again this morning, Gabe mentioned as we walked out of the firm. She's at the house. She says she's not leaving until she speaks to you. She can stay there as long as she wants, I said, adjusting my cuffs. But I'm not going back. There's nothing left for me in that zip code. I took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. For the first time in 6 months, my chest didn't feel tight. The unemployed burden was a character in a story I'd finished reading. I walked toward the entrance of the Titan building, my building, and felt the weight of the responsibility. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. It was about about redemption. It was about proving to myself that the foundation I'd built wasn't made of the jobs I held or the people I loved, but of the integrity I refused to lose. As I entered the lobby, the staff stood a little straighter. The whispers followed me, but they weren't mocking anymore. They were filled with a wary respect. I headed for the elevator, the same one Barrett used to ride with his head held high and his ego on display. When the doors opened on the top floor, I walked straight to the CEO's office. I stood in front of the massive mahogany desk, looking at the city below. I thought about you, the people watching this, the ones who feel like they're stuck in the part 1 of their own tragedy. I want you to look at me and see that the bottom isn't the end. It's the only place where the foundation can be truly tested. If you're at your lowest point, if you've been betrayed, if you feel like a ghost in your own life, don't stop. Keep building in the dark. Keep managing your own Phoenix Fund, because one day the lights will come on and you'll be the one holding the keys to the kingdom. I sat down in the leather chair, feeling the cool touch of the material against my back. I opened my laptop and began the first day of the rest of my life. The screens were full of numbers, strategies, and plans for growth. But for a moment, I just sat there in the silence, appreciating the peace that comes when you no longer have anything to hide and no one left to please but yourself. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Reed, your 10 a.m. is here. Send them in," I said, my voice calm and certain. I looked toward the door, a new chapter beginning before the ink on the last one was even dry. I am Miles Reed. I am no longer a ghost. I am the architect of my own destiny. And for the first time in a long time, the view from here is exactly what I imagined it would be. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If you could say one thing to the person who doubted you the most, what would it be? Write it in the comments. Let it out. And if you're ready to start your own comeback, subscribe and stay with me. This journey is just beginning, and we're going to build something incredible together. I closed the laptop, the click of the lid echoing in the vast, quiet office. I walked over to the window and watched the snow finally stop, the sun breaking through the clouds to illuminate the skyline. I stood there for a long time, just watching the world move on, realizing that the best part of being a survivor isn't the winning. It's the quiet moment afterward when you realize you don't need the world to notice you're still standing. You already know.